specifically the first 10 years of your career, determine your lifetime earnings. Hello everyone, I'm Seth. This is Acquired Salary. In today's video, I'm going to discuss salary negotiations, specifically what to do if you think you're underpaid. And to facilitate this conversation, it'll be a reaction to CNBC's video that they published earlier this year. Before we get into it, if you're new here, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. With that, let's jump into things.
Only 34% of Americans are satisfied with how much they're paid at work.
I wish there was like an exact guide of what you should be paid and what everyone else should be paid. There's just not anything like that out there.
I was accepting crumbs because I thought it was a really huge deal that I was working for this major news organization. $40,000 was the most I've ever made in my life. So I thought it was what you're supposed to be earning at that stage in my career. What I have learned from that experience is closed mouths don't get fed, and always keep yourself educated.
Most of the time, the people who...
Yeah, to the point of closed mouths don't get fed, that is extremely important. But then also from that standpoint, when they're talking about how there's no direct guide on what you should be making, it's not necessarily true. There's a lot of resources on the internet, specifically Glassdoor, but Glassdoor is a little bit iffy in terms of if you want to use them because of they were acquired earlier this year or it was late last year, and now the privacy of the information you provide is potentially at risk. But from that standpoint, you can use Glassdoor, you can use Indeed, any of the general job search websites, as well as there are industry reports that kind of report the average salary. And my favorite resource is always the Bureau of Labor Statistics Occupational Outlook Handbook. And there's all sorts of information out there. So there is a little bit more of a guide. You just have to kind of dig into it, and yeah.
who are paid more just because they ask for it.
To get a salary adjustment can be really, really difficult to do. There are some employers who really want you to shake them down in the sense that they will match an offer if you get it from someplace else. It's a bad...
That is one of the best salary negotiation strategies in terms of saying, first off, actually having another offer is always good in terms of the risk analysis and risk mitigation. But then from that standpoint, if you do actually have any sort of interest in leaving, you should probably take the competitive or competing offer, simply because the underlying root causes that made you want to leave in the first place have not changed, unless it was strictly salary that made you want to leave.
Bad practice, but it is pretty common.
Sometimes it's easier to just jump ship.
Here's how to figure out if you're being underpaid and what you can do about it.
In 2016, I worked for a major news organization in ad sales as an account executive. I was an immigrant. I was here on DACA, so I was very appreciative of such an amazing opportunity. I was making $40,000 a year. I really thought that was, a lot of money at the time, until I had like a casual conversation with my coworker who was actually complaining about making about $102,000 a year. It never occurred to me until that conversation that I just, I was severely underpaid.
Around 1 in 20 workers in the U.S. said they would quit if they found out their coworkers earned more money than them.
And this is important in terms of, a lot of companies, they might have policies against discussing your salary because they want to continue to get away with underpaying you. But then also from that standpoint, especially early on in your career, specifically the first 10 years of your career, determine your lifetime earnings. So it's best to make sure if you're in that first 10 years of your career that you are advocating for the highest salary possible so you can set up your lifetime earnings.
63% said they would demand equal pay.
You can certainly ask other people doing similar jobs in your own organization how much they're being paid. The question, though, is figuring out whether the people you're talking to are really doing the same job that you're doing in all ways that matter.
From that standpoint, if you're working for a major corporation, you can kind of leverage the fact that if you have the same job title, it doesn't matter what the nitty-gritty responsibility differences are. The same job title should warrant the same salary. Otherwise, one of you should have a different job title.
Really great account executive. I always hit or exceeded my quota quarter after quarter. At times, I can argue that I was actually doing a lot better than my counterpart that was earning significantly more than I was. I think the only difference between her and I is that she was a lot better at the political side of things.
60%.
That's a key point there. At a certain point, especially in the corporate world, it becomes a game of politics.
of U.S. workers say they didn't negotiate for more money when they were last hired.
The difference between someone who gets $55,000 and $60,000, a lot of times is just because person number 2 just asked for $60,000. It's not because they're better at their job. It's not because they're more experienced. It is simply because they just asked for it.
Given the fact that I was an immigrant at the time on DACA, I was always thankful for just any opportunity that came my way. I was accepting crumbs. That experience has kind of pushed me to not accept crumbs and to always push and go after more in my life.
A discrepancy in
I can't remember the specific statistic off the top of my head, but literally if you get a job offer and you ask for more money, the success rate is something like 80% success rate in getting more money. So it's definitely worth asking.
pay between two comparable employees may be due to market conditions.
So there's this issue that's called compression, and compression means that people are being paid differently on otherwise identical jobs because on what the job market happened to be like when they were hired. The big place we see this most commonly is people who've been hired a couple of years ago, and then somebody new comes in and gets paid more than they are because the job market has tightened, their skills are scarce now, and they're paid more than you are.
And that is why it's always important to watch, if you know your company's hiring, a lot of states, well, not every state, but there are a good number of states that have salary transparency. So if you happen to be in one of those states or the job gets posted in one of those states, look at what that salary range is. And then if it is more than what you're currently making because you were hired earlier when the job market was in different conditions, that is ample time to go to your employer and be like, hey, you guys need to pay me exactly what you're paying this new candidate, because if anything, you should pay me more because I have more experience within the specific company and knowing the procedures and all that. And yeah, so certainly a good opportunity if you know your company's hiring for the same exact position you're in. Keep an eye on that, see what you can find in terms of the direct competition or the direct correlation with the new salary being posted.
My initial reaction, I kept it calm, and I didn't want to allude to her that I made such little money compared to her. I kind of went back to the drawing board. I thought to myself, okay, clearly I'm underpaid. What am I going to do about it?
When you realize that you're underpaid, that is your green light to go do research.
The term underpaid shouldn't be used to compare you to a colleague. It should be compared to you and the market. There's always going to
Exactly. It is always a comparison between you and the market. And from that standpoint, early on, my first job out of college, I accepted a position, and it turns out I was severely underpaid. I remember when I went and did all my research and came into the salary negotiation, I literally had to ask for a 100% raise to be the median salary for the industry, which was just absurd. I was like, what? How are you guys getting away with this? Well, they didn't end up getting away with it after I went in and had that negotiation. So it's definitely important to make sure that you're comparing to the general market, and more specifically, this is where the Bureau of Labor Statistics Occupational Outlook Handbook comes in handy, is specifically in your state. Obviously, you can get more refined data, like specific to the company that you're at, using Glassdoor and other salary research websites, but again, you have a sampling bias potential there, as the Bureau of Labor Statistics is much more broad and encompassing.
be a range of the market.
It's possible that an objective person might say you're wrong, that these pay differences are not really that different, or there's justifications for them.
Compensation has a lot of different pieces to it. It's not just like a simple formula that's like years of experience equals this amount of money, education equals this amount of money, and location equals this amount of money.
In addition to speaking to people in your industry, you can do research online. One way is through referencing salary ranges listed on similar job descriptions.
There are states and cities that have transparency laws on pay that require the employer to report or make available what they're paying. But the caveat to that is that what they end up reporting are typically salary ranges for a job.
When you see a range,
yeah, and you can see some egregious salary ranges, such as an entire low-end salary fitting into the salary range, like, $60,000 to $120,000. Like, that's not an accurate range. And obviously, if you've been in the job market and you've applied to jobs, when you look at that, you tend to look at the upper end of that range, when in reality, the employer's looking for the lower end of that range, which, when you think about it in the recruiting and hiring process, it's just silly. Like, obviously, if you're an employer and you're trying to target that lower end of the range, well, then you should probably tighten the range up. But again, it all depends upon the laws that they're bound to, and if they're bound by law to report what everybody in the position at the company is currently making. If somebody was exceptional at negotiating their salary and has additional responsibilities that should really give them a different job title, then that's where you could potentially see this large discrepancy between 60,000 to 120,000.
I think I see this with my clients and I see this with candidates. They automatically think, well, I deserve the high end. Like, that's just natural, but that's where the disconnect becomes between the candidate wanting the high end and the company knowing, well, that range is not actually true.
I would say that when recruiters and hiring managers and companies are putting those numbers up, it's always with the expectation you're probably going to fall somewhere in the middle. Usually the range that they put is the minimum and what's likely the highest that they are willing to pay for that position. Even with sites like Glassdoor, Indeed, Blind, Levels at FYI, Salary.com, Built In, and I use all of these as data points for compensation, but the best way to find that data is really by tracking the jobs that you're applying to and looking at those salary ranges, right? Especially if it's in your location, because location is such a big data point when it comes to compensation. And sometimes I'll have people who will look at positions that for the states that are required to post salaries like New York and California, which are really, really high cost of living
Colorado is one of the states that requires salary ranges to be posted as well.
areas, and they're like, okay, well, this customer success position is paying $170,000. Yeah, it's paying $170,000 for a unicorn company in California, but you live in Tempe, Arizona, which is probably not going to pay the same amount.
At the end of the day, companies are teams and they're going to pick the best players for the best value.
I decided to continue on.
Exactly, and especially in this current job market, there's a lot of high-value people in the job market that are still out of work and in need of jobs. So you can see, based on current market conditions, there's a compression or decrease in what offers are actually being presented to candidates, because, okay, well, if you don't take this, I can take the second best candidate in our pipeline and they'll accept it for this salary because, some people are getting desperate.
On as if nothing ever happened, as if I haven't heard anything, and to do some market research just to understand how much it is that I'm worth given my experience, what experience that I've had in the past that's transferable, and then take that research with me onto finding a brand new job.
One option, if you suspect you're being underpaid, is to request a salary adjustment from your employer. But career experts say you should go into the conversation prepared.
You should never bring up another coworker's name in that conversation. You shouldn't say, I had a conversation with Henry. I know with the same experience and the same skills. I realize that he gets paid 20% more than me. I want the same salary as him.
So when you go for that salary adjustment, you want to bring in other data points, and those data points need to be the impact that you brought to the company. Because at the end of the
Exactly. From that standpoint, if you can bring hard data of, oh, hey, on this project I saved the company $1 million, I would like a little bit of a salary adjustment to be making six figures, or whatever the adjustment it is that you want to make sure. And if you're in a publicly traded company, you can kind of take a look at if you want to get really into the weeds, you can see what would be reasonable for you to ask in terms of adjustment based off of their margins. But that's a little bit more intensive, especially if you're not familiar with profit and loss statements. So from that standpoint, you can just kind of go based off of the value that you've provided to the company. As long as you're not asking to be paid more annually than you've brought value to the company, you should still be in a very solid position. You should really be asking to just take a very small percentage of what you've saved for the company or something along those lines to make it a really easy negotiation.
the day, they could just find somebody else who's cheaper to do your job as well.
I think what you want to avoid is escalating this to threats, which is easy to do. So once you start saying, this is not fair, other people elsewhere are making more than I am, hint, 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 they're thinking.
Employers are going to be like, okay, well, go to where those employees are. Go somewhere else. We're going to hire somebody else for cheaper.
Thinking, okay, she's threatening to leave. Your employer might very well say things like, there are other people who would love to have a job like this. Then they're also suggesting that you could end this relationship. And that is really dangerous territory to go into. So I would avoid that almost at all costs. But often your boss doesn't want to let you go, but the people at the top who are trying to hold the line on pay just say, I'm sorry, we can't do it. Good luck.
Another option is to try to negotiate other benefits the company provides, such as 401k match, stock options, commuting benefits, or paid time off. If you're
Big thing here is paid time off. Paid time off is huge in salary negotiations, especially considering, who you are as an individual. Do you actually use your paid time off? Because if you don't use your paid time off and then you negotiate more paid time off, you've really accomplished nothing. So that's something that's important to keep in mind. And then commuting benefits, if you're working at an office And it's a little far for you, especially as return to office mandates are coming through. Maybe you can figure out a negotiation to get an exception to where you can work remote a little bit more often than the rest of the company and standard policy. Something along those lines is really great in terms of potential opportunity to negotiate.
Employer is unreceptive to a salary adjustment, you can always consider leaving. But career coaches say you should be careful how you go about it.
I knew almost immediately that I wasn't going to go back to, one of my leaders and have a conversation about it because I didn't personally feel like it was going to be a productive conversation. So I decided to just quietly look for other opportunities.
One of the things you have to ask yourself is there anything that would make me stay here?
Will I ever get paid what I'm worth? And if the margins of you getting paid versus what market value is too crazy high, that is when you should look at other options out there. It might be changing.
Yeah, and from that standpoint, if you're going to make a career transition, especially early on in your career, you want to be very mindful of what transitions or moves you make, because if you're switching every year, every 2 years, something along those lines early on in your career, it's okay because, that's just simply the nature of the game, and it's the fastest way to hit the top end of your salary band. Well, if you do that too often or you do it for too long, you can end up getting labeled as a job hopper, which can become a barrier to getting new jobs in the future. So from that standpoint, it's definitely worth considering how you're going to make the move. And then exactly these points here are important questions to ask.
Changing to a competitor. If you want to make a complete pivot and you're like, you know what, this role that I'm currently in, it's always underpaid. The market value for it is not what I want. Then you need to look at other roles that have a range that's higher, that's better fit for you.
I ended up.
Well, from that standpoint, based off of a video that I reacted to last week, Gen Z is just like, they're never going to be able to find that role that has the market value that they want because they all want something like a $590,000 salary. Well, newsflash, that pretty much doesn't exist.
Finding another opportunity, which happened to be way better. It was remote, a lot more healthier environment. I used that offer to put in my 2 weeks, and I never looked back since. That gave me the confidence and the guts to kind of land my first six-figure offer. Ultimately, in the end, I'm now an assistant VP. Without that experience, I probably wouldn't have been able to get here today.
In certain circumstances, underpayment could be a sign of discrimination. Workplace discrimination laws vary by state. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or EEOC, enforces laws that protect workers from unfair treatment, harassment, retaliation, and other potential violations.
It's the small little things you got to look out for. If you constantly feel the microaggressions during your day-to-day job, it's probably affecting your pay as well.
I have been discriminated in my career. I don't think it was necessarily at this organization because I have witnessed them kind of treat everyone equally toxic.
You would be surprised at how little evidence you need to start a case like this. And so if you ever feel that, reach out to an employment lawyer in your state.
Many lawyers take cases on contingency and will be paid a percentage of any money that results from a judgment. While documentation will assist in moving the legal process forward, cases can take years to work their way through the court system.
I definitely would say to anyone else that's listening out there, do your research. Don't be afraid to have those tough conversations, negotiate, ask those questions, and don't just accept any old crummy offer.
Yeah, great points in terms of making sure you're not being a victim of discrimination and reaching out to a lawyer if you really need. Overall, I'm curious, what do you think? Please share your thoughts and comments in the comment section below. And if you kind of like this content, I do have some salary negotiation resources on my website, and you can also, reach out to me in the comments and can have a discussion about any sort of salary negotiation that you're in or anything along those lines. And since you've made it this far into the video, you may as well subscribe to the channel and like the videos so you don't miss out on future videos just like this one. Until next time.